Thanks to everyone for coming. My name is Garth Patil. I'm going to be giving a talk on multi-tenancy with Keycloak. Specifically, the talk is about an extension that we built called keycloak-orgs. The GitHub repo is there. The base idea is single realm multi-tenancy for primarily targeted at enterprise SaaS applications, and it's open source. So quick in the way of introductions. Before I talk about who is phase two, I wanted to say there's a bit of cosmic unfairness about the fact that I'm presenting in English to people that predominantly speak German. I've been living in France for 8 years, and despite that, if I had to give this presentation in French, it would be a total disaster. So I wanted to say I really, really appreciate that people are letting me speak in English, and if there's anything that's not clear, please ask me later, and I'll try to explain it in a different way. Who is phase two? We're a Keycloak extension support and hosting business. Our primary goal that we started off with was to accelerate time to market and enterprise adoption for modern SaaS use cases. We had a bunch of us worked for a company previous, which was an enterprise SaaS company. We had this term called SaaS crud, and it was all the junk that we had to implement before we could get to the point of actually implementing the value in our product. And so phase two is a lot about building out the infrastructure for building a SaaS application, specifically on the authentication and authorization side, such that if you were building an enterprise SaaS company, you wouldn't have to sort of reinvent the wheel every time. So in 2020, we were founded as a Keycloak consulting company with our first customer company in Canada called Plotly, which is a data science workbench platform that we built out a lot of this functionality for. In 2021, we launched the managed service offering. In 2022, we launched a free version of a hosted product. And then this year in July, we launched our paid SLA version. Okay, who am I? I've been an entrepreneur since 1996. I've been a Java user and lover since 1.1 in 1997. I started using Keycloak in that aforementioned company just before version 3 in 2017, and we started phase 2 in 2020. And these are some of the companies that some of them I helped start, and some of them bought us, and so I ended up working for all these companies. Okay, so what and why? Keycloak currently lacks, in our opinion, good solution to the problem of multi-tenancy for enterprise SaaS and many other use cases. Now, one of the reasons we think it's not a good solution is there is no top-level concept of an organization or a tenant. So as we'll see in subsequent slides, there are definitely a lot of ways you can implement multi-tenancy in Keycloak. But one of the things we found among competitive products, both closed source and open source, was there was, in many cases, a top-level concept of an organization and a tenant, which, if you look at a broad user base that may be very sophisticated as IAM administrators, or looking at implementing an IAM or SSO system for the first time, you want to appeal across that spectrum. And so having a top-level entity and concept of an organization was very important to those people. So that's one of the reasons that drove us to build this. As I said, it's possible to shoehorn other solutions into existing functionality, but we found from testing and doing a lot of prototypes that they were neither scalable nor maintainable. And that's kind of what drove us to actually build our own thing for the first customer and then build it and use it for additional customers. And ultimately, why? We had a support customer that was willing to pay for it. And we noticed on the boards that it was a very, very frequently asked question that didn't have, in our opinion, a satisfactory answer. So what's multi-tenancy? For those of us that have been around 10, 20, 30 years, we know that a lot of applications used to be single-tenant applications. They were isolated. The data store were totally isolated. We've moved a lot, mostly because of cloud-hosted applications, to multi-tenancy, where multiple customers use the same app infrastructure and the same database. So if that's new to you, that's what it is. They're sharing common infrastructure resources and code base. Now, why should you care about that? So again, a lot of the focus of this extension and this talk is around what I'll call modern enterprise SaaS use cases. in those applications, the organization becomes a first-class entity, not just for identifying a user as a member of one or more organizations, but from the perspective of authentication and authorization. If you are selling an enterprise SaaS app, table stakes is you must integrate with the enterprise identity provider owned by the customer. In so many cases, we encountered customers who were saying, hey, we just launched the enterprise version, and the first question out of their mouth was, great, how do you integrate with ADFS? How do you integrate with Okta? And they didn't have a good answer to that, such that their user could self-manage those integrations. And furthermore, the authorization step requires knowledge not just of the individual, but of the organization or organizations that they're a member of in order to evaluate policies. So, ways to solve it in Keycloak. Keycloak not extended. Realm per tenant. That's a common way of doing it. I've talked to a lot of people today that said it's the way that they've used it. The other is using Keycloak groups to model organizations, roles, and memberships. So swish, we did it, right? So we decided to take a slightly different approach and throw some of that out, and I'll tell you the reasons why. I love that panda, by the way. It's awesome. That's me in the costume. Okay, why we went another way from the realm perspective. So we tried essentially templating to make child realms that had uniformity of configuration, each associated with the parent realm that they would be brokers to. We encountered a couple of problems with that approach. One is that, as you know, for a single Keycloak instance, there are some scalability problems. People report different thresholds at which that happens, but we found in our installations it was about 300 or 400 realms. There is the possibility of sharding to different clusters. We found that to be pretty unmanageable, especially for customers that were fairly unsophisticated. Furthermore, realm management roles, fine-grained authorization didn't allow the specific permission combinations that we wanted for organizational admins, leading to a bad admin UI experience. And in order to apply these templates and try to maintain consistency of configuration, we had to build an external application in order to create and maintain the child realms and to allow configuration that was applied across multiple realms. And then ultimately, for organization administrators, less sophisticated users, using the Keycloak admin UI in a reduced permission context was confusing and intimidating. We got that out of our user research associated with the prototypes that we built. Why we went another way in terms of groups, what we built in our test was organizations and organization-specific roles as groups and subgroups using naming conventions. And then a group and a client for each organization, and organization-specific roles were created as client roles and mapped to child groups one-to-one. Again, we encountered some problems. One, for large sets of organizations, we ended up with huge proliferations of all of those different entities. That becomes brittle to manage, especially if you're an individual administrator who's not really sure what the conventions mean and how they map to specific roles. Again, we needed to apply a template and use an external application in order to apply those templates to change, add roles, remove roles, change them. Furthermore, that didn't give us the kind of things we wanted to, like delegated authorization for an organization owning an identity provider or owning a specific client. Oh yeah, and this was, again, it was specific to using an external application to consistently apply configuration. So, step back a second. What are the use cases we're actually trying to solve? One, we're trying to introduce that organization as a top-level entity into Keycloak. We made the decision based on a customer request that users can be members of multiple organizations. This is useful in an employee-contractor situation where they can be members of multiple organizations. Use of the customer IDP, it was very important to have for us to have this concept of an owned identity provider owned by the organization. It was important to delegate the setup and management of that identity provider to the organization. It was important that through that identity provider, it allowed just-in-time provisioning and membership of a user. Again, domains and IDPs could be owned by the organization. We wanted to create a system where organization management could be delegated to organization administrators. So a subset of admin type functionality could be delegated, but not through the Keycloak admin UI, such as membership, invitation, and roles. As in Keycloak, one of the things we love about it, almost everything is available by API, so we wanted to use the same value. And we wanted to build in an extension to the admin UI so it felt ergonomically like you were using the normal Keycloak admin UI. So here's what we built. Keycloak-orgs extension. As you'll see in the demonstration that I'll do in a second, it's not just the Keycloak-orgs extension. This is the base extension that enables a lot of other extensions that we distribute and that we call multi-tenancy in Keycloak. What we found out is that people like it. They had that use case. So we kept up a really fast release pace. I would say we release very, very often. And people come out of the woodwork. Customers and non-customers ended up helping us, which we found was great. So I'm going to stop yakking and show a demonstration, a pretty simple demonstration of what's possible, but I hope it shows the power of what we built. I missed that movie. OK. So the first thing we're going to do is just look at the Keycloak admin UI when it's, let's see if we can see this all here. OK, so you can see at the bottom here, oops, we've got these extensions down here. And we've got organizations. And you can create a top-level organization. Let's just call this foo. And in these organizations, you've got the idea of attributes similar to group attributes. You've got members of an organization. You can see here there's this sort of awkwardly named user. This is our concept of an organization service account. We didn't have the ability to sort of hide it in the same way that Keycloak hides their client service accounts, but that's what that is for. The ability to invite users, create and assign roles to users, and then manage identity providers. So let's go in and create. I think I already created a user. OK. Yeah, I've created a user. I'm going to go ahead and assign that user membership. So this allows us to add users to membership. And then there's associated roles. So I can assign roles. And these are all default roles right now. You can add additional types of roles, but these are the default organization roles that can't be removed or changed. And these are responsible for access control to functionality within the organization's API. So this is kind of an admin user that I've just created. Let me just quickly double check something. OK, so I've created just a demo application. OK, that doesn't have that. I think this is actually Thomas's demo application. But we use this for demos. This lets us show the profile and the token. I'll get to what Portal does in a second, but I want to first talk about what information can we put in the token. So we've got a couple of these organization-specific mappers. One allows you to map organization attributes in the token. One allows you to map organization roles in the token. And we've had a recent addition by the community which allows you to set and extract an active organization in the case that the user is a member of multiple organizations. Let's turn on the organization role. And let's not put that in the ID token. OK, so go back here to the example application. Reload it. You can see now that into the token, you've mapped the identity of the organization that they're a member and the roles that they have in there. And then you can see the name of the organization down there. Let's move on to invitations. So when I said it's not just organization, Keycloak-orgs as the extension that enables a lot of other things, and this is an example of something we were talking about. So we built out something that's essentially the account console. It's got all the functionality of the account console that exists in Keycloak. but we built it out to also self-manage organizations. And again, this UI will render based on the permissions that the user has in each of the organizations. And so this allows the user the ability to, depending on their authorization, go in and see and manage roles for users, to invite new members, to manage domains that are owned by an organization, and to set up SSO connections, meaning to set up IDPs. So let's actually just do a quick example. So an invitation, you can invite a new member, and then you can pre-select which roles that user wants, whether or not they have the view roles, the manage roles, all the roles. Okay. Let's log out. And let's see. Oh, let me actually, let me show for I'm gonna change the authentication flow a little bit. I didn't create that user. I'm just gonna set the authentication flow. Another extension we have is called the magic link flow. I don't know if some of you are familiar with it, but it's similar to one of the experiments that one of the keycloak maintainers did. But in this case, it allows login via an action token. So I'm going to just associate that as the browser flow. I'll go back to this in a second to tell you what else is happening in this flow. But we should have got an email. Let's see. Okay, so this user, Jeff at Test, got this email. He's prompted to go log in. So because I changed the flow to the magic link flow, it'll just take, oops. So that sends an email magic link. I think it does at least. There we go. So that magic link logged in the user, Jeff, and then it takes us into a required action, which runs every time by evaluate triggers. It looks to see for that user if they have any active invitations, and then it presents this challenge to them. Do they want to become a member of that organization? So once they accept, we can go in here and actually, let's go back to the demo application. We can see that the user has been granted membership in the organization automatically, and those roles are now in the organization, or sorry, in the user's roles for that organization. So you see now that user is a member of the organization, and they've been assigned the roles within the organization automatically. So that's a demonstration of how to invite a user and pre-assign roles associated with the user. A couple of points on that. How we did that again is we implemented an invitation required action. It just has to be enabled. It runs every time using evaluate triggers to know whether or not it needs to add the required action and then challenge the user. The other thing I did that I said I'd come back to is I set us up an alternate login flow. And what I did here is I used a couple of things here. So this one, for those of you that know Sven Torben, we've forked Sven Torben's Home IDP Discovery extension. And if you're not familiar with that, what it does is it allows you to basically understand, based on the email address or the username or some attribute of a user, what is their associated identity provider. And the way that we've forked it and changed it is based on an email domain that's owned by an organization, we allow that IDP to be looked up by that email domain. And so it's similar to the functionality of what Sven Torben's extension does, but it looks it up based on organization and organization domain. The other thing that's here is just this magic link, which is if you have a realm set up that does not allow self-registration of users, but you want to use something like invitations, you've got to have a mechanism of adding new users that have been invited. So this gives us the ability, because in that Magic Lake extension, we can force create a new user in the extension, and that's based on the input information by the administrator that invited them. That's kind of what happened there. Second thing I wanted to show was setting up an external identity provider. So let's go back to Portal. So there's this application, again, that we built on top of the keycloak-orgs extension that allows us to delegate setup of an external identity provider. And one of the applications that we built on top of that is what we call our IDP wizards. I'm not going to go through a full demonstration of this because it would require us going kind of back and forth between an IDP like Okta or ADFS to actually set it up. But I just wanted to show this as an example of an application that we built on top of the APIs for organizations that allow us to do delegated setup and management of identity providers. So just as an example, if you use Entra or what used to be called Azure AD, this is essentially a live wizard. And what I mean by live wizard is it takes you through the steps just as in the same way documentation would, but it also allows you to grab the values that you'll need to plug into the various forms at the identity providers, and then ultimately pull in IDP metadata and then automatically create those. So it's really meant to be a very, very user-friendly way to set up an IDP for someone who might be an administrator who is familiar with ADFS, Okta, et cetera, but is not familiar with Keycloak and setting things up through that. What I did is I set up one of these already, and I'll show you what that association looks like in the admin. But when you create an IDP using that mechanism, it automatically associates that IDP with the organization, and then gives you some control at the admin level of what the post-broker flow looks like and what the sync mode is. But you can see here, it's already set up. And then if you go into identity providers, you can see that already set up. I've just used another Keycloak as the identity provider. So let's quickly go through the flow of what's about to happen. We've got this organization, Acme, that owns the domain acme.com. There's a set of domain verification steps that are possible through the orgs extension I won't cover, but in this case, it's a verified domain. So when I go in to log in, using a domain, that matches, it immediately takes me to this other realm. So this is the other identity provider that I'm using. And let me see if I remember which user I did. Thomas? Right, so I now have a new user. You can go here and verify all the things that happened. User as normal, just-in-time provisioning, organization, members, we now have a new member, and that member that came through has the organization mapped in his token. So that's a use case that's used with most of our customers, and we see that as these are the sort of primary use cases that are enabled by the organization's extension. Okay, since most of you are developers, part of the talk is about how we did it. Who knows what that screen is? Sven Torben knows. It's all of the providers. It's all the provider implementations in Keycloak. And so when you first load provider or provider factory Javadoc and you look at it, it can be really intimidating. It's this huge set of things. There's lots of things that are overriding other things. There are lots of things that it's actually very difficult to override. And so there was a big question of kind of where to start. What do we do? What are we trying to achieve? And what are the facilities in Keycloak that are available for us to do that? So sort of skipping to the end, what did we learn about extending Keycloak in this effort? And what have we learned about it enhancing this extension over the last couple of years? We learned that there's a bunch of stuff that's easy and real real compliment to the maintainers that they had the foresight and the design ability to build those SPIs out in a way that made these extension points really easy. Now, what's hard was something that made it difficult for us to really hook into the existing functionality of Keycloak. So one of the things that you'll notice is that there isn't the ability to associate client roles or realm roles or groups with organizations. And part of the reason is we could have made the entity association, but overriding behavior was pretty difficult. And so it would have required not just the entity association, but also overriding behavior. Furthermore, we couldn't go into the group model or the realm model or the client model and add methods to that. So changing behavior and making hooks, that was difficult. And overriding defaults was difficult as well. We also found that making anything available to authorization services, there were hacks to do it, but it was very difficult. And so we did not do those things. We didn't attempt to do those things. Couple of quick design principles. We wanted to be very minimalist, not try to boil the ocean. We wanted to release features that we had broad agreement on and then iterate based on our real customer and open source community member use cases. We wanted to adopt the same styles and tools as Keycloak, use the built-in things when they existed, even if we didn't agree 100% with how they were built. This is a big one. Pretend that we are Keycloak maintainers and that we could actually get something into the tree. So this was a design principle up front, which is we'd love for something like this to eventually make its way into Keycloak main or be something that is the way to implement SaaS multi-tenancy. But do not fork Keycloak to make it work. And so that's my problems with the things that were hard in Keycloak. We decided not to try and solve those because we determined that it would require us to fork Keycloak to make that work. So what's there? We created a new SPI for a top-level organization provider. Like many of the similar providers, realm provider, user provider, et cetera, it manages both the JPA entities and their conversion to these active models. We tried to build it as close as we possibly could imagine, as if you were just pulling down the session and calling organizations. And so what drove our design of the interface for that provider was how do people load users out of the session? How do people load clients out of the session, et cetera? And so that really was inspired by how Keycloak does it, and it drove our design. REST resources, totally modeled after the Keycloak admin API. Primary use cases were the Keycloak admin UI extensions, the organization portal, which you saw, the identity provider wizards, which you saw, and most importantly, the ability for the customer to have the same programmatic ergonomics that they have with the Keycloak API today. Furthermore, we took all of that and we built out a couple language ergonomic SDK libraries, so it was easy for people to use our admin APIs in the same way that they use the Keycloak admin APIs. So a lot of authenticators to make all the stuff work. As I said, we forked Sven Torben's home IP discovery, which has a couple of authenticators. We have the ability to select organization and select identity provider. So if a user is a member of multiple organizations, it's possible in the authentication flow to select which provider they will be logging in using. As you saw, there's a post-broker flow that causes members to be just-in-time provisioned. So if you log in through an external IDP and you're not yet a member of the organization, it will associate with you. It will associate you with the organization just in time at the end of the login flow. Selecting of an active organization is something that's new to us, but it gives you the ability in the login process to optionally select a single active organization in the session, and then adding authn session notes with organization data. We also built invitations as a required action, again, so we could trigger it every time just based on the evaluate triggers method. Mappers, a couple of mappers. I showed you these, the ability to map organization roles, organization attributes, and which is the active organization into the token. A couple of other observations that we made. So that's, I'd say, 90% of the sum of the extensions that we built inside of keycloak-orgs. But some of the other observations that we made that I wanted to share is that we did, I spelled factory wrong. The post-init method, we do a lot in there to make sure that the defaults are the defaults to the user require less setup. And so what do I mean by that? So when you load some of the providers, we go in the post init method and we set up default authentication flows. So you aren't going to be wondering, okay, how do I go and fit the magic link or the home IDP discovery client into the right place in the authentication flows? And so it's a way of communicating to the user in an easier way without requiring them to go read documentation. Additionally, we have some realm management roles so that the top level administrators can be granted the ability to make changes to organizations. We go in and we add those roles in the post-init method so that we know once the providers are loaded, all of the right things are available to us. Another thing we make extensive use of are provider events to act on realm, client, and user, create, update, deletes. And then furthermore, we created provider events of our own for changes to the organization model. This was based on customer requests because not only are customers using the extensions, they are building their own extensions that pull in the organization provider, thus make it as simple as just calling session organizations. Other fun hacks we learned. So that portal and the IDP wizards are keycloak extensions. So one of the things we didn't want to do is have this proliferation of applications that you had to run if you wanted to adopt our portal and adopt the IDP wizards. And so one of the ways we ended up doing this is we built the sort of static web assets as a theme, and then we built a REST resource to serve them as a front-end application from inside Keycloak. And so some nice benefits of that are, one, it runs all in the context of Keycloak. The two, themes can be treated basically as a caching file server for the assets for the front end. And this is ultimately how we're able to bundle a lot of stuff with Keycloak. And actually, side note I didn't put in the presentation, extending the admin UI turned out to be very, very hard for us, and the new admin UI. And maintaining it over the last 4 versions has also been very, very hard for us. So we're going to do the same thing with our admin UI. We're going to build it as a separate app. I'm really excited to look into the admin extension SPI Alexander was talking about, but we're already down the road of building it as a separate app. But we'll use the same bundling methodology so it can be released as an extension and run from within Keycloak. So it's not going to be an external application. Anyway, there are examples in our repos of how to do that if anyone else wants to see how we did that. So a quick future roadmap. I want to get to some time for questions, so I'll go through this quickly. One of the things we don't do today is we don't hook into Realm import and export. So this is our #1 customer requested feature. They want to be able to export with organization data and then import it again. We're working on that now. Thank you for the export import manager. It's staying, isn't it? Shrug. Another thing is tiering of roles. This is something that's been requested several customers, the idea of having grouping of roles and even grouping of organizations themselves. We're looking into that. We have a couple of discussion topics on the repo. If you're a user or you're interested in being a user and that would be a feature you needed, that would be something to chime in on. Skim support. We've deployed Pascal's great Skim extension for a lot of customers. We've also built a version that has some filtration that allows Skim to be used for individual organizations and only by domain or by other filter, only manage the users associated with that organization. This is a question and feature request we had come up over and over, which is we want a Skim endpoint specifically for an organization, so we're adding that. For the active organization concept, we're building in support. It should be released soon for the prompt select account OIDC standard that allows you to basically select an active organization in the authentication flow based on that prompt. And then one of the things we're actively trying to work on is getting some concept of organizations into Keycloak. And some people at Red Hat I talked to were kind of surprised by that because they thought, wow, well, you have this world of customers and this world of things that you've done based on your own organization's extension. And just to make our position clear on this, we would love to have a concept of top-level multi-tenancy in Keycloak, because we think that actually one of our primary values is the applications and layers we build on top of that. that give our customers self-management. And so if we were able to build something like this into Keycloak or have something like this in Keycloak, we would love to do that. There's a couple of topics and discussions currently outstanding on the Keycloak GitHub. So if you have interest in that, please chime in on those, because I think there's currently activity inside the Red Hat team. There's a lot of will to get something like this done. And we're super excited about helping, giving them concrete use cases from our customers, as well as participating in the development. So quick before I pause for questions, special thanks. We have a lot of at-large contributors from our customers as well as at-large community members. Big thanks to them. I know some of them are watching today. Thank you guys. The Keycloak maintainers, authors, and contributors, Alexander, please pass on our thanks. We really appreciate all the work that you've done. I've been at this for a while. I made my first contribution to an open source project, NetBSD, in 1996. And I found that there's a huge spectrum in how functional open source projects are. And I have to say, of the ones I've worked on, Keycloak is incredible. The team is incredible. They want the best for the community and for the growth. And I really appreciate this. Another shout out to Dimitri for BeerCloak. I don't know if any of you guys have used BeerCloak, but it is a now 7-year-old example of how to build a complex set of extensions that work together like this. And even to today, it doesn't work on current versions of Keycloak. Even to today, it's a totally awesome example of how to do that. We used code from this in our early versions of keycloak-orgs, and it was really useful. Another shout out to Thomas for awesome Keycloak and all of his great open source contributions. Sven Torben, thank you so much for home IDP discovery. It's really made something we needed to build a lot easier. Nico and Sebastian, incredible event. Thank you guys so much. Really appreciate you putting this together. We're excited to be a participant in this. And ultimately, the whole Keycloak community. Thank you guys so much. And now, questions. And if you want the slides and links, they're up there.
Yeah, we want to share the slides afterward and also the recordings. Give us some days, maybe.
Any questions about stuff, guys? No, not gonna use that. Easy.
I just wonder in one...
Do I have time for a musical number?
I can ask one question. So
yeah.
There was this discovery, and you could have forwarded the name to the next RAM, right? So you just saw the login prompt, and you need to type in the username.
That's supposed to work.
Twice.
That's a great point. It did not.
There's this Casey username hint or something like this.
Does it require specific customization of the IDP? I forget.
No,
do you have? It doesn't. It doesn't.
So
we're doing something wrong.
Yeah, there could be something like forwarded, but it's somewhere there. So you don't need to actually type in the username twice.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a login hint, exactly.
Yeah, I don't know why it's not doing that. Because normally it does that. Yeah. Thank you.
So thanks again for your talk.
Yep. Thank you, guys.